Suppose that your life suddenly becomes unmanageable because of an unexplained and frightening event. Imagine that you, an ordinary person, become the host of something creepy and alien that is slowly taking over your body and mind. It's not just a disease or physical injury, it's something much more horrible. With each passing day, you lose control, and everything that was once important to you begins to fade into the background. Now you are forced to fight not only external threats, but also what lives inside of you. What do you do when what once seemed normal starts to turn into a nightmare and all you are left with is a fight for survival? This story starts out that way, with a seemingly normal life turning into a true psychological and physical nightmare. Yanka is a young woman on whom life has left no traces of joy and hope. She works in a circus, performing as an acrobat, but her life turns into a nightmare when she finds herself the victim of an unpredictable force lurking in her body. After she is infected by an entity bent on survival, her inner world changes. Initially, Yanka is the image of a weak and frightened girl who seems unable to resist her fate. But, over time, she begins to realize her new abilities and embrace them, gradually transforming into a being capable of controlling and harnessing the power within her. Despite the horror she feels about her new condition, Yanka decides to fight for her life in an effort to rid herself of what has overcome her. Her motivation is the desire to regain control of her life and body, to rid herself of the monstrous entity that is now forever bound to her existence. At first, her actions are driven only by survival, but as time goes on, she begins to think about more complex questions. What is it like to be possessed by evil, but not to lose her humanity? Yanka finds herself on the edge between becoming a mere vessel for an alien force, or a person who is able to conquer fear and embrace her destiny. Yankee's world is a combination of circus atmosphere and the dark, painful realities of her life. The circus in which she works is a symbol of fake joy that masks a deep inner emptiness. This world of apparent cheerfulness and vivid illusions, where artificial smiles hide real suffering, becomes for Yanka the place where her power is awakened. Working in the circus, she meets people who, like her, are trapped in their own desires and failures. One such person is her circus performance partner, Renee, a man who essentially does not realize the true value of life, consumed by his own ambition and vanity. He initially sees Yanka as nothing more than an object to be manipulated and used, and this only adds to her despair, as she begins to realize her new identity. Other minor characters, such as the doctor who witnesses her transformation and the gangsters involved in the dirty deeds, only add to the atmosphere of violence and desperate struggle in which Yanka is forced to find her place. Their interference in her life creates even more confusion and illusions, making Yanka feel part of something bigger than her personal tragedy. When Yanka discovers that her body has become the host of a sinister creature, her world begins to shatter piece by piece. It's not just a physical change, but a moral trap that tears her soul apart on a daily basis. Gradually, she realizes that she is no longer in control of her actions. For her, every move, every choice is not only the result of her will, but also the whim of the entity living inside her. The blood-eating worm becomes her master, and Yanka faces a real struggle for her consciousness. At first, she tries to hide her illness by leading a normal life, but her body, increasingly demanding human blood, begins to dictate its own terms. Yanka finds that her thoughts and emotions begin to change. She feels an increasingly acute desire for power. Her instincts become aggressive, and every choice she makes is a step towards violence. Her control issues become especially acute when her body begins to enjoy the act of violence, and the inner voice representing the essence seems to whisper to her that this is the only way to survive. Her inner conflict intensifies when Yanka realizes that she is beginning to lose not only her physical self, but her moral self as well. She feels her formerly human qualities, such as sympathy and empathy, fade away with each passing day, and cruel and destructive instincts take their place. These changes turn her into a being who can no longer be attached to everyday life, to her former role as a woman and member of society. She begins to lose meaning in what once seemed important, and increasingly resorts to violence to get the amount of blood she needs to survive. The moral dilemma becomes even more complex when Yanka realizes that she has lost her ability to distinguish good from evil. She realizes that she must commit crimes to preserve her life, But gradually she is tormented by the question, what will happen to her soul if she continues on this path? Her worries have been overshadowed by the horrible reality that she can no longer return to her old life, and all she can do is continue to exist in this new, nightmarish body where every day is a struggle for control. The climax in Yanka's life comes at the moment when she faces the inevitable result of her inner conflict. The creature living inside her no longer just demands blood, it becomes part of herself, part of her very essence. When she decides to abandon her former life and give in completely to this horrible friend inside her, her actions become increasingly destructive and ruthless. Her morals disappear, and the power she gains from this parasite begins to control her every action. The turning point comes when Yanka decides that she no longer wants to be controlled by this creature. She comes to the realization that she is no longer able to hold the balance between her humanity and the parasite's needs. On some level, she realizes that perhaps if she kills this worm, her life will go with it, but she can no longer bear the horrible control and deprivation of her own self. This decision becomes her last chance for salvation, but the way to get there will require terrible sacrifices. At some point, Yanka realizes that all her attempts to rid herself of the creature that has taken up residence inside her are not having the desired effect. In an effort to free herself, she begins to feel intense physical pain. The entity in her body becomes so powerful that she loses the ability to control her movements. Each attempt to free herself becomes an agonizing struggle in which her body submits to the creature's will. Yanka feels the creature controlling her, making her feel pain in every movement. It becomes a real torture as she realizes that her body is no longer her own. With each passing day, the pain intensifies, and Yanka begins to feel herself losing her identity. The entity is taking over not only her physical state, but also her mental balance. She feels her thoughts begin to submit to the entity within, and her feelings begin to fade away. Her attempts to free herself become more and more desperate. But each time she tries, she realizes that she can no longer regain control. Her body and mind are slowly losing their integrity, and the struggle seems futile. Yanka continues to hope that she can get rid of the creature, but realizes that even if she succeeds in destroying it, it won't bring back her old life. Everything she knew before is gone, and now she can't get back what she lost. Every attempt she makes causes more pain, and her despair grows. She realizes that her existence can no longer be the same, and no matter how much effort she puts in, the outcome is inevitable. Soon Yanka is faced with the realization that perhaps the only way out is to accept her new status. She realizes that the entity within her has already become an integral part of her. Her inner resistance subsides, and she begins to realize that avoiding destruction is impossible. This leads her to believe that her life no longer has meaning, and all she can do is try to complete the process to end the suffering. Finally, she comes to the decision that the only way to stop the destruction is to complete the process. Yanka realizes that her existence no longer makes sense, and that despite her best efforts, it is impossible to return to her previous state. This realization comes as a final attempt to free herself from the unbearable torment, and finally in her struggle with what can no longer be controlled. As Yanka continues to struggle with the creature's influence, her life becomes increasingly disrupted. She loses the ability to control her actions, succumbing to its manipulations. Externally, her life does not change, where every step she takes leads to increasingly dire consequences. She loses her moral compass and turns into something completely different. After a series of catastrophic events, Yanka is faced with the realization that her body and mind are no longer her own. She realizes that, during all this time, the creature has used her for its own purposes without giving her a chance at a normal life. This struggle for survival between her inner aspirations and the monstrous power of the creature leads to the destruction of her relationships with others, her psyche, and morals. However, the climax comes when Yanka finds herself on the brink of total destruction. Realizing that she cannot defeat the monstrous force, she decides to find a way to break away from its influence. This decision gives her a chance to regain control of herself and try to get her life back. But to do so, she must do the impossible: separate herself from the creature and free herself from its destructive power. Yanka's decision does not lead to complete salvation. She realizes that the consequences of her actions are inevitable. Even if she gets rid of the creature, she will no longer be the same. the moral and physical damage she has suffered will stay with her forever. In the end, her attempt to return to a normal life proves futile, as she has already been changed forever. What would you do if you were in Yankee's situation that she is in? Imagine that your life suddenly becomes a struggle for survival, where you cannot trust your own body. Do you think it is possible to maintain your humanity while in that state? Can you stand up to the struggle for liberation if your mind and body are already under the control of something much more powerful? What moral and personal boundaries would you cross for the sake of survival? How far would you be willing to go to free yourself from this outside influence, even if it has become a part of you? And how would you act if you realize that your struggle for freedom could lead to unavoidable consequences for those around you? How would you feel if you were trapped in your own body without control? And how would you deal with the growing threat when the realization that you can't win begins to creep into your consciousness? Could there even be a boundary beyond which one would not return to normal life? And if so, how exactly would that change you and your perception of the world? What would be the right path for Yankee in such a situation? Fight to the end or try to walk away, accepting his sacrifices as inevitable?